Hi, everyone. This is going to be a addendum to our series on Second Peter 1:10, and somebody, Mr. Brown, provided me this link today, and he told me about 2 Peter chapter 1:10 in the John Wycliffe Bible. I'm not going to read it at the moment, but you can see their good works. Because I have to get my Gaelic going here. It's almost like undesirable English. Well, let me try it out. Wherefore, brethren, be ye more busy, that by good works ye make your clapping and chessing certain. Has English changed since 1382? Well, that's how it sounded in 1382. But the one thing you can still see is good works. And this is important for manuscript evidence because, well, Erasmus is the first point we can see a mistake happens for sure. And then all the other manuscripts, and they date before 1382, they all have good works. Did John Wycliffe have a manuscript that was consistent with what we see in those earlier ones? And the answer is yes. We can see that. So we know through 1382, that's about, let's call that 1400. That's about 115, 16 years before Erasmus is collating. So he should have had that manuscript strain in his hands, and he just makes a copying mistake. And and we'll go over that. And we showed it last time. Let's just back up here for a minute and just read how the verse really reads in English and not Old English. And this is Dewey Rhymes. This is a Catholic Bible in its basis. It's on Bible Hub, so it has some status. I think it was done in the 1850s, and but it has the last line there. I have it change in red from Mr. Mountie's literal, and I'm going to read that back to you so you can hear it in the correct way. But for some reason, Dewey Rhymes translates those last few words as shall not sin at any time, which uh, that's uh, that's not in the text. So anyway, here's what it says: Wherefore, brethren, labor the more that by good works you may make sure your calling and election. For doing these things, you shall never come to ruin. That's Mountie's version. And as we point out on the left there, all manuscripts until Erasmus in 1516 prepared a collation known as the Textus Receptus, with that one error where he does not have the good works. Uh, and I traced the sources. He did not copy correctly due to something in the Latin Vulgate he was using, because it has good works, but the version of the Latin Vulgate he has does not have good works. So it's strange. Good works goes all the way back in the Latin Vulgate, and so his didn't have it. So he had a corrupt Latin Vulgate version. That may be the way to understand it best. But since then, all the manuscripts that have come out of the dust, like the Codex Sinaiticus, the Vaticanus, and all these other things, and the Alexandrinus, they all have good works. That's pretty astonishing proof that these didn't even exist when he did it, and they've all come out reconfirmed that it was good works. So anyway, let's keep going here, and we've done that. Here's where you can see the Erasmus. He's lining up. He's trying to create a new Latin Vulgate, and what he comes out is it says "Qua propter fratris potius operum date," and so on. If you keep looking there, you can make your calling an election sure, and he ends it. And there's no bona opera. If you look at the Latin Vulgate on the left, you'll see it has bona opera. So somehow, I think my surmise is that he saw the word operum, which is a verb in Latin that means work, work to make your calling and election sure. And he mistakenly saw in the copy, maybe it was copying of his own, and he saw bona opera in the Latin that he was sourcing from, and he saw on the page he had written operum, and now it's somehow he just decided it's the same words because there is a commonality of the word opera and operum, so he just simply missed it, and that could have been what happened. So in the copying of the Textus Receptus side of his columns, that happened. And then if you understand what he's doing is he then is trying to provide a Greek collation text that would support that, and so maybe he saw the Greek text he was looking at. And he said, "Oh, that doesn't support my version on the right, the text, the Latin. So I'm going to now delete it over here in the Greek text. It's a mystery because it's in his text. It's in the text he's looking at, and we can see that. Why? Because we're looking at it right here, 2 Peter 1:1 in the Wycliffe. He's got the version 115 years approximately earlier. All right. So let's keep going here. And now I have one more thing to show you in a second. What we reviewed recently is that the Codex Sinaiticus definitely has it's Kalon ergon, and you can see that right there. That's an actual, that yellow with the red type. That's directly the text taken out of the Texas, out of the Codex Sinaiticus online at the Codex Sinaiticus Project. Their English translation, we found out this: be diligent to make your calling and election sure. They admit that they had borrowed a pastor who died in 1870s, but somehow his family in 1905 decided we're going to release a book called the Translation of the Codex Sinaiticus, and their father, grandfather, maybe just, somebody decided just to call it that, but it is not the translation of the Codex Sinaiticus. We could see it doesn't have these words, and they're right there in the Codex. And so when you go online and you look at the what the Codex Sinaiticus Project says about the translation they've offered, they said this is not a basically they said this is only for navigation purposes only, meaning this will help you find the verses, but it will not help you translate them. It is not a translation, in essence, is what they said. It's just a navigation tool. So we provided all that last time. So another little development we had. And just want to remind you, what got me into this was Daniel Whitney and Whitby had said in 1726, it's 300 years, it's 250 years since this Erasmus mistake. It's more than enough time to have fixed this. And he was very adamant about it. And then that caused me to want to research it. So as he said at the time in 1726, the word good works are supported by every ancient source imaginable, including the context. So in context, good works make sense. But you see what he's saying? There's no exception, and there's never been an exception in any manuscript found since. So it's in every Greek manuscript. It's only missing in Erasmus's collation, where he's trying to create a new synthesis, and he just misses it, probably by his confusion, his Latin Vulgate, his own Vulgate he's trying to create. He's dropped it there, and his source must be corrupted, and he's just maybe making a visual error, which, he's doing an amazing job for one man trying to collate all these texts and create a new Bible, New Testament Bible. Let's keep going here. And this is the original pages I'd found from Mr. Darby. So you could just see this goes back hundreds of years now. This is since Darby. That's another 200 years. So we're now 506 years since Erasmus made this mistake in 1516. And people have been screaming and yelling. Darby was the loudest. This needs to be fixed. It's a material change to the Bible. And we know it's there. And we can't lie anymore about it because it's overwhelming. Every text that's come out of the grave, Alexandrinus, Codex Sinaiticus, the Vaticanus, they all have it. So what are we fighting over this for? What's the delay? What's the cause of everyone having it wrong? Everyone, 100%, except the Dewey Rhymes Bible. By good works, according to Gill, is in the Latin Vulgate. It's in both copies of Beza. Beza is the oldest manuscript other than the Codex Sinaiticus. It dates from 400 AD, allegedly that date. And both of them, and these were stolen from a monastery in the south of France, and they're considered valid. And by the way, the Geneva Study Bible didn't use it, but they did a little footnote that lets you know they have it. They know about it. And they're giving an excuse why, they didn't want to give any misimpression about, good works, whatever. There was something they said there that was implicit, that they had something more to say, and they just want to say doing good things is useful to show others that you're saved. That's not what Peter is saying. Peter is saying it's useful for you to be sure you will be saved, not that you're going to prove to other people you're saved. Anyway. And then Clark, he said it's in the Codex Alexandrinus. 9 others: the Syriac, Urpins Aramaic, Coptic, Ethiopic, Armenian, Syriac, the Vulgate, and Bede. And I'm going to show you Bede in the 9th century, the 800s, in a minute. And he says that by good works you may make your calling election sure. This clause is found also in the edition of Collianus, Paris, 1534. So he's the French Erasmus. He tried to collate all the texts, and he had it too. And what Clark says, and has probably been omitted by the more recent editors on the supposition that the edition does not make a very orthodox sense. And that's the only reason why it's not being restored, my friends, because it doesn't fit with orthodoxy. But you know what? If you believe Second Peter is the word of God, you believe that in your heart, then you have to tell the Bible editors, put this back in. Even though I may not agree with the doctrine it espouses, I believe it's the word of God, and I want it back in the Bible. And all these people who tell me they believe 2 Peter 3 is endorsing Paul have to then reconcile now with 1:10, and that's what they should have to face, because that is inconsistent with Paul. So Peter, if he's endorsing Paul in chapter 3, well, gosh darn, he didn't know that Paul teaches against good works as being necessary to ensure your calling and election is sure. No. He doesn't. He says that's in fact. He makes it sound like if you try to do good works according to the Bible, you are damned because you're trying to be justified by your works rather than by faith alone. So you can't read 1:10 out of the Bible so that your view of third chapter 3:16 of 2 Peter fits your doctrine. You need to put this back, and then you're going to have to see what 2 Peter sounds to you after you put this back in, and then it won't sound anything like what you think you're reading. And that's exactly why it's kept out for 506 years. Is this honest scholarship? Is this honest translations? No. Did a man of great reputation step forward and tell us this? Daniel Whippy was a giant in his time period, 1726, and he wrote books and books and books, and this was one of his main issues that he was fighting for. Anyway, now, one more thing I have to add from last time is I found the full quote of Venerable Bede. I was digging it up, and I found it in this very interesting book, and I want to recommend it to people. It's called the CSB Ancient Faith Study Bible, and what's pretty remarkable about it is it would never have existed until the electronic age, because it has collected every single quote in the after the early Christian church, like from the 400s on. So this is like the version of the early Christian writings .com webpage, which is only basically up to 350s 400 era. This takes it all the way into the 1200s 1300s, and now look at what page this is. Page 2322 of 2661, and it literally has a perfect collection of quotes, tells you who they are. They're lined up to each verse, so you can actually see what people were commenting about a passage earlier in time. And so there's the book. So I highly recommend getting this edition. It's at play.google.com. It's the Play Store of Google, and you can put all your library books from googlebooks.com into that same place, so you can read all your books in one place on your tablets, iPhones, and wherever. Anyway, getting back to this, we're not going to read anything more than we can see the word good works in his citation to 110. If we read this whole thing, we're going to get into doctrinal sub-issues, so I don't want to do that. I just want to get back to the fact that this book now, it's very clear that if we go back to where was the mistake, here's where the mistake happened. Erasmus is the only place where you can actually isolate that his version of the Latin Vulgate that he's trying to recreate is the new future Bible, because in his world, remember, there's no English translations allowed, so you're only allowed to make Latin translations, and he was trying to do something that would prove superior to any other Latin translation, which would be go get the best Greek text, then translate those Greek texts into Latin. But when he did this, he must have made a mistake of some sort. He doesn't have it. And had he double checked and looked against the Latin Vulgate, it clearly has bona opera. He might have actually not realized his mistake even then, because the word operum exists on the right side of his columns. And so he might have seen the word opera, but that really was simply that Peter is saying, brothers, do whatever you can, work to do whatever you can to make your calling and election sure. And that's where this mistake happens. The word operum, maybe he's looking at another source Latin text and said bona opera, and he thought it was the same thing. He had transposed or translated correctly from the Greek into Latin, but he had not done that, and that's why his Textus Receptus was probably wrong, and he did not have those words, and that's where they disappeared, and then they didn't appear in his final version on the Latin side. And I proved in another slide that it's not on his left side either. It's not on his Greek side. It's not on his right side. So it's clearly starts in 1516 with that manuscript. And fortunately, these pages were at a museum webpage that the museum put each of these pages online, so you could thumb through it. So it's kind of, until the modern age, how could we have ever proven all these things? So see, if you look at the bottom there, bibles-online.net flipping book /1519. That's the flipping book is the each page. So if you want to double check me, go check it out. It's right there on the bottom of the screen. Okay, so now we definitely know where it happened, why it happened, and we know that it prior to Erasmus, Wycliffe, 1382, about 140 years earlier. He's looking at manuscripts that have good works. 800 AD, that's another 500 years earlier. Bede still has good works. Then, of course, we have the Vaticanus, Alexandrinus, and the Codex Sinaiticus. All three are from the 300s to the 400s, and they all have good works. So there's absolutely no doubt. And then if you go back to all the Latin manuscripts, all the Latin Vulgate manuscripts, they all have good works. I mean, there is not one. As I will now go back now, I want to show you something. This is what was his name? I got to find it now. Hold on. I'll find it. Let me go back. Oh. Oh, here it is. Wait. Here it is. Where is it again? Oh man. Ah, Daniel Whippy. Whitby in 1726, at least by that day he died, he said, the words good works are supported by every ancient source imaginable, including the context. So when you read the context, it's saying, by doing these things, you will, prevent yourself from suffering destruction or ruin. And so even the context tells you something's missing. What things am I supposed to do? In the words, when you put them back in, now that sentence makes sense. So the context fits it. All the manuscripts fit it. It's just missing in Erasmus's texts. That's where it happened. We know where it happened. We know where the accident happened. And Erasmus was not doctrinally against the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel of Jesus Christ is pretty obvious. Erasmus was basically the one who came up with the idea of double justification, that you're saved initially by faith, but then you have a secondary justification by works. In fact, you would almost say that Erasmus would have loved this passage. It is the second. This is one of the greatest proofs of the double justification doctrine. So remember, that's Erasmus's claim to fame. He came up with the double justification doctrine, which later Bucer, later Luther himself changed and went away from faith alone to double justification. And we have a whole series of episodes on that. And that happened between 1541 and his death in 1547. He clearly changed, and then that led Melanchthon to change, and he got George Major to, and they have ultimately, after Luther's death, they changed the message of salvation was changed in the Lutheran Church, which stood firm from about 1555 until many years later, until the Book of Concord, when after Melanchthon dies, not soon afterwards, the Faith Alone party rose back up in the Lutheran Church and then reversed the Reformation of the Reformation that both Luther and Melanchthon, his second in command, were instigating, and then Melanchthon executed and finally got the change back to double justification, Erasmus's original idea. So that, just to repeat what that's saying, and think about how close that is to this actual teaching here in First Peter. So it would be exactly. Just listen to this for a minute. I just want to say this. I'm gonna read to you. I know it by heart. Double justification says you have initial justification by faith alone, but then you need a secondary justification by works. Okay, and then Major is hired or engaged. He was a pastor, engaged by Melanchthon to write a book called On Good Works, and that's the book that transformed the Lutheran Church, and they adopted the double justification doctrine officially in 1555 under Melanchthon's guidance. Okay, and Luther had died in 1547. So it took him only about 8 years to get it done, but he did it. And both of them had been planning this when Luther died, and now it's executed. Now, look at this verse. Is that not the same thing? If you were a double justification person, would you, like Erasmus, would you deliberately get rid of this verse? Absolutely not. It says what you are saying. Wherefore, brethren, labor the more, that by good works you make sure your calling and election, for doing these things you shall never come to ruin. There you go. The idea of double justification is you need that second justification by good works. You know what? I'm going to pause right here, and I want to pull that up so you can see that. Hi, everyone. So we're going to take a little detour here about Erasmus. Could he have made this as a deliberate error? And the answer is absolutely not, because it stands for his propositions, and we're going to see that. So this is from the preface to Jesus' Words on Salvation from 2014, I think it was. And I'm discussing Erasmus because I have to explain where Tyndale's coming from in about 1530 period. So I asked, what was this change in Tyndale? Tyndale adopted what the first reformer, a Dutchman named Erasmus. So we need to know Erasmus was really the reformer before Luther. If it wasn't for Erasmus, there would be no Reformation. And that he's not given enough credit. And we're going to do a little dive on footnote 15 here in a minute, just to look at his bio. He had christened in 1530 the doctrine of duplex justitia. In English, this means double justification, or sometimes it's called second justification. Tyndale's elaboration on Erasmus's doctrine lived on in the minds of famous men such as John Locke, Jeremy Taylor, George Horne, William Paley, and Charles Finney. And what is that? Recognition of, we're going to look at the scholars recognizing that Tyndale had adopted this view, the view that was first proposed by Erasmus. And in the discussion of this, you're going to learn what Erasmus is teaching. And you'll see it's exactly 2 Peter 1:10. There's absolutely no disagreement among the leading scholars about Tyndale's final views on salvation. Cross, for example, explains, quote, increasingly in his last years, Tyndale was moving away from the doctrine of faith alone and emphasizing the covenant and works. Footnote 16. Another evangelical scholar admits Tyndale, quote, certainly did not, end of quote, remain loyal, quote, to Luther, quotes, doctrine on justification. Tyndale's later doctrine was, quote, overthrowing the whole basis of the German Reformation, which is to say justification by faith alone. That's another scholar. Footnote 18. Tyndale's lesson was clearly recognized as reflecting Erasmus's doctrine of double justification. Tyndale is described pejoratively, accordingly, as allowing, quote, works a decisive role in salvation, end of quote, which makes the, quote, theology of Tyndale legalistic. Of course, it's what Jesus taught, too. We have the parable of the sheep and the goats for proof. Next, Clare Cross concludes the idea of, quote, double justification is the proposition which Tyndale eventually reached. So now I'm going to go take a deep dive to show you what Erasmus is all about, but you can see that this idea is you have a preliminary justification by faith, and then you need a secondary justification by works as you continue to live after that moment of faith. Now I want you to hear about Erasmus. And let me see if I can switch the screen to that here. So this is footnote 15 about Erasmus and what a hero he should be to the Reformation. But because he doesn't fit in with the view of faith alone, he believes faith alone is only an initial justification. And he came up with this idea of there being necessary two justifications. And by the way, that's a neat way of reconciling Jesus to Paul sometimes. And so this would be something that I would think the Paulinists should take a look at and examine themselves for at least one way of accepting Jesus. And so here we go. Erasmus's work, Handbook of a Christian Soldier, was released in English in 1503 and found an Oxford scholar, William Tyndale, as one of its earliest avid readers. Erasmus, in a series of books, heroically battled errors by the Catholic Church, including its doctrine of Mary, its traditions not found in Scripture. Erasmus, one of the best scholars of Europe in ancient Greek and Latin, was subjected to persecution and indictment by the Inquisition. One can still hear the unmistakable bitterness in the Catholic Encyclopedia article, quote, Erasmus, about this very first reformer. Luther emerged only in 1517. In 1516, Erasmus published the New Testament for the first time in Greek with his own Latin translation. This violated Catholic prohibitions, which claimed the Latin Vulgate had become the official text. Well, he was really trying to say, shouldn't my Latin Vulgate become the new text based on new and better authority? That was his point. The Erasmus Greek text was the one Luther used to translate the Bible into German in 1522. Would there have been a German Reformation without that Bible, my friends? Because without it, how could Luther have translated anything into what he was doing? I don't think he knew ancient Greek, so he had to go off of the Latin. Anyway, Erasmus also gave the English-speaking world the first quasi-translation of the New Testament entitled Paraphrases of the New Testament in 1516. The paraphrases were amplified and revised in reprints in 1519, 1522, 1527, and 1535. Tyndale's English New Testament first appeared in 1526. As a result, Roman Catholic officials in Spain brought articles of indictment against Erasmus to bring him before the Inquisitor, but the process ended in deadlock, so they couldn't vote to arrest him. And that's in Charles Lea, A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Macmillan, 1907 to 414. And I can tell you, I found that book and I read that there, so that's not just something I pulled out of the internet. Upon Erasmus's death, his works were placed on the Index of Prohibited Books by the Roman Catholic Church. Johann Ursag, The New Schaff-Ursag Encyclopedia, 1909 at 166. And equally, I found that as well. So he is a hero of the Reformation, yet an unsung hero. But why is he unsung? Because he believed in the doctrine of double justification, that faith alone only saves you initially, but does not save you after that point. After that point, you will now have to do the very principles we're reading in 2 Peter 1:10 when it's corrected. So you see, there's no way on God's green earth that he did that deliberately. He was an advocate of the very position of whatever 2 Peter 1:10 is talking about. It's almost like uncanny how clearly it shows his point of view. All right. So I hope this helps everybody, and we can hope and pray that the verse will be corrected, that the word good works will be restored one day. It's 506 years after the mistake by Erasmus. He wouldn't have wanted it, so he deserves his legacy not to be that he actually destroyed the one verse that would have most supported his point of view about double justification. All right. God bless everybody. Ciao. Bye.